I wanted to first thank Jill Crockett and Joel Crockett and Jill Blue of Four Eyed Frog Books for carrying my novels for sale and for providing um, me the opportunity to speak with my new neighbors who support their wonderful local bookstore. Performing literary, I'm sorry, performing literary events during a global pandemic requires a little more creativity in our presentations. There are some benefits for doing virtual presentations as no one has to travel, so there's no worry about parking or driving home late at night, and people from distance can come like Walt. So don't worry about that. Just you can also get a refill on your drinks without disturbing anyone. So just please sit back, relax, enjoy a lovely beverage, and I promise I will stay as long as it takes to answer everyone's questions. There's a chat function in Zoom, and if you have a question during my presentation, feel free to just type it in the chat as you think of it. That way you won't have to worry about remembering it later when we get to the Q&A section. So overall overview of my presentation so you know what to expect. I will give a brief summary of the literary history of my source material and its lasting cultural impacts, because although it has a rich history, it is not all that well known today. Then I'll go into a travelogue section showing pictures from my research trips to France, a quick reading from my first novel, and then the Q&A section. So most people are familiar with the Arthurian legends, also known as the Matters of England. My source material is similar in tone to the legends of King Arthur, but they are instead based on the legends of Charlemagne. Now, while there is not a consensus with historians as to whether or not King Arthur was a historical figure, there is no doubt about the importance of Charlemagne. King Charles the Great, Charlemagne, or in German, Karl the Gross. Charlemagne expanded the Frankish Empire during his reign, which lasted from the year 768 until his death in 814. He was a giant among men for his time, for he stood 6'4" and lived until the age 72. During his reign, he not only expanded his territory to cover most of Europe, he expanded literacy and started what is known as the Carolingian Renaissance. The word Carolingian comes from the Latin Carolus Magnus. The highlight of his reign was being crowned on Christmas Day in the year 800 by Pope Leo III as Emperor of the Western Roman Empire. Later, it became known as the Holy Roman Empire. Charlemagne's historic accomplishments were many, and shortly after the marble slab was slid over his tomb, the mythologizing of him began. For several centuries, troubadours and jongleurs in southern France and northern Italy created a cycle of legends regarding Charlemagne and his paladins. The legends were in both French and Italian, and although what has come to be called the Matters of France are more widely known today in Italy than they are in France. Some of the stories involved Charlemagne going on a crusade to the Holy Land. That never happened. He died in 814, and the First Crusade was called in the year 1095. So even when there was some historical event in a story, the facts were changed to make it a tale larger than life. The most famous of these legends is La Chanson de Roland. This is written in the 11th century, and alas, the poet's name is now lost. We cannot attribute it to someone like Homer or Virgil. The story is about a real-life defeat of Charlemagne's army by Basques in the Roncesvalles Pass in the year 778. However, the defeat to the Basques is changed in the poem to being the Saracen army, and Roland, the hero of this epic poem, is betrayed by his stepfather, Ganelon of the House of Maganza. Charlemagne's rear guard was attacked as they headed back to the Frankish Empire, and they are massacred. Roland finally realizes that he cannot fend off his enemies and blows upon his horn, to alert Charlemagne, who is at the lead of the procession. Roland's temples burst from blowing so hard on his horn that blood courses down his face as he dies. It was a magnificent death and an incredible tale. This story became so popular that Roland could not remain dead. Similar to Hollywood sequels that don't explain how a character has come back to life, Roland and the other paladins were alive again and shared new adventures. In the French tales, he was Roland. In the Italian, he was Orlando. With these new tales also came new heroes and new villains. These were the superheroes of the Middle Ages. And here are just a few examples of the Chansons de geste. And down here, la chanson d'asprement, is it French, and la canzone d'aspramente in Italian. So two of the largest contributions in the cycle of legends is Orlando Innamorato, Orlando in Love, by Matteo Maria Boiardo, and Orlando Furioso, Orlando Enraged, by Ludovico Ariosto. And this is a large poem that's in 2 volumes. Boiardo began his work in 1478 and died in 1494 with his poem unfinished. Ariosto was later given the task of finishing Boiardo's story, and his work began in 1505, and the first publication was in 1516. Now, the overarching storyline involves a love story between the famed paladin Orlando and the beautiful princess Angelica. Orlando falls madly in love with her, but she never returns his love. Once he realizes Angelica loves another, he becomes enraged, or furioso. Beyond that, these 2 poems created a sprawling tale with locations spanning 3 continents, Europe, Africa, and Asia. It features multiple wars, including invasion into the Frankish Empire by the North African Muslim army, and none of these wars ever took place. The story ranges from the depths of hell to the summit of terrestrial paradise and includes a magical ride to the moon and back. There's a cast of thousands, dozens of major characters, numerous antagonists, a myriad of interweaving plot lines, and enough dramatic material for multiple novels, movies, or even several seasons worth of an HBO or Netflix original series. Orlando Furioso, the sequel poem, became more popular than its predecessor poem and has been translated into many languages. The first English language translation of this Italian masterpiece was by Sir John Harington and published in 1591. The tale of how this came about might be apocryphal, but it is entertaining, so I'm going to share it with you. Sir Harington is said to have translated a bawdy passage from the poem, and he shared this with the ladies in waiting for Queen Elizabeth. The Queen was not amused. As punishment to her godson for the lewdness displayed, she forbade him from court until he had translated the entire poem. The banishment lasted for 8 years. Another anecdote worth mentioning is that Sir John Harington is also credited as inventing the flush toilet and is a noble ancestor to the actor Kit Harington, better known as Jon Snow in the HBO series Game of Thrones. Orlando Furioso became an international phenomenon and inspired countless artists, composers, and even William Shakespeare. One of the most famous paintings inspired was Ingres' Roger de l'Ivron Angélique that hangs in the Louvre. Note that Rogero is riding on the back of a hippogriff. I will explain more about that significance later. The Louvre held a special exhibit in 2009 regarding the art inspired by Ariosto's masterpiece. Here are some of the many operas inspired by Ariosto. Handel was so inspired, he wrote 4 operas adapting Orlando Furioso. Another famous work is Miguel Cervantes' Don Quixote, where the main character imagines himself to be a heroic figure similar to Orlando and Rinaldo. The enduring legacy of the legends of Charlemagne is the popularity of puppet theater in Sicily. The Normans invaded the island in 1061 and brought with them the legends of Charlemagne. And while the reign of the Normans in Sicily only lasted around 30 years, the popularity of the Carolingian legends is still present to this day in their opere dei pupi. This is a close-up of Rinaldo de Montalbano in French, Renaud de Montauban, a line of Frankish heroes. These pictures were taken at the conference Mad Orlando's Legacy, held at Stanford in 2010. So that was my brief overview of the history of the legends of Charlemagne. And you're probably wondering if I was a literature major, and no, I wasn't. So why did I read Orlando Furioso? Blame it on Harry Potter. Back when the Harry Potter series was incomplete, I engaged in debates in the online fandom as to where the story was going. And there was a theory bandied about hippogriffs being a symbol of love. I began researching and discovered that the first time a hippogriff was used as a character in literature was in Orlando Furioso. Because I'm a nerd and a stickler for details, I decided to read the poem in its entirety so I could see how the hippogriff was used in context. It was the first time I had read an epic poem, and I wasn't all that enthused by Orlando's doomed love story. However, I was captivated by one of the other myriad of storylines. It was the love story between the warrior maiden named Bradamante, niece of Charlemagne, and Rogero, a Saracen knight descended from Hector of Troy. Bradamante was given the call to adventure to rescue her beloved, who was being held prisoner in a high tower by a wizard. It turned Joseph Campbell's hero's journey on its head and was an inverse of what I had come to expect from stories of knights in shining armor. I couldn't believe this was a story originally written over 500 years ago, and I had never heard of this kick-ass heroine from literature. It is a Romeo and Joan of Arc styled love story. Once I finished reading the poem, I felt cheated that I had not known about these characters before. I knew all about Guinevere's messy love triangle with Arthur and Lancelot that didn't turn out well, but I never knew about Bradamante and Rogero. In 2005, I decided to try and rectify that cultural oversight by embarking on an ambitious project to adapt this story into novels for today's audiences by using modern storytelling techniques. So now onto the travelogue portion of my presentation. So once I began the adaptation project, I then read Orlando Innamorato, if for no other reason than I wanted to know how Bradamante and Rogero met. Then I had to decide what plot points and plot threads I needed to keep and which ones to cut. I remember Mr. Miyagi saying, "Think tree, Daniel-san," in The Karate Kid. I needed to prune an unwieldy bush of multiple plot threads into a cohesive storyline and cull anything that didn't forward the plot. That meant cutting many things, including the interaction between Rogero and Angelica that was immortalized by the famous painting by Ingres that I showed earlier. Because I have a master's degree from Sonoma State as a historian of science, I felt obligated to do a deep dive into historical research on the Middle Ages, historical figure of Charlemagne, religious customs for the time for both Christians and Muslims, foods, warfare, etc. And then I examined the source material to determine the settings for plot points. That led to an intense studying of maps and atlases. I need to get a sense of distance between sites and the timing needed to travel between them and whether the settings made any logical sense. I discovered pretty quickly that the term poetic license had a real meaning when it came to their narrative. The poets were marvelous storytellers, terrible historians, and even worse, geographers. Boiardo described the invading North African army that were traveling by ship as having landed south of the Ebro River, which is south of Barcelona, disembarking, traveling over the Pyrenees Mountains, and then joining the battle near Montauban, all in a single day. If you've ever watched the Tour de France and seen the stages set in the Pyrenees Mountains, you'll know how twisty the roads are. They're worse than Highway 1. And realize you couldn't do that distance today using a car with ease, let alone being on horseback. And the climax of my first book was set by Ariosto to be in Bayonne, on the Atlantic side over on the west side of France. There was no logical reason for all the various characters to just happen to meet up in this part of France. Likewise, there was an enchanted castle whose location in the poem changed. It was first placed off the coast of Brittany. Later, it was near Paris. And then lastly, in some part of central France in a forest. And episodes of the castle were interspersed with huge chunks of other storylines, so it wasn't apparent about the inconsistencies until I studied it carefully. I knew that I needed to anchor the castle in one place rather than have it be in 3 locations, and for plot necessities, I needed a forest and a nearby town with an abbey in it. This is the greater Toulouse area. Montauban is the hometown of my heroine, the sister of Renaud de Montauban. So I used that as a starting point, and you can see there's a large forest east of Montauban. It is the Forêt de Grasigny, the Grasigny forest. In reading up about some of the towns near the forest in the Michelin Green Guides, I discovered that Saint-Antonin-Noble-Val dated back to the time of the Romans and had an abbey founded in the 8th century. So that became the new location for the climax of my book. It happens that the little village on the Aveyron River was also used as filming location of 2 movies, Charlotte Gray and The 100-Foot Journey. The first is a story set during World War II, and the other is a feel-good movie about food. My husband and I, Scott and Evan, traveled to France in 2007 and later in 2011 to see the places I was writing about. We started with a week in Paris, and I wanted to start with showing you where we stayed. It is an historic building that is actually an active, working hospital founded in the year 651. Now, the current building only dates to the 19th century after Baron Haussmann's renovation of Paris, but the hospital has been in Paris in one form or another for over 1,000 years. So you enter the main entrance, go right, and then turn left in the hallway and go past a beautiful courtyard. And so even if you don't need to use the hospital at all, it's worth a little trip to go in and see the courtyard, and then you can go up a flight of stairs, 12 stone steps, and view historic woodcuts lining the hallway. And you can do that, and it's like a free museum to see these woodcuts. It's really cool. To get to the hotel, you go inside, take an elevator to the 6th floor, and as you exit the elevator, you turn right to enter the hotel, because if you went straight, you'd go right into the cardiac wing. So our skylight had a beautiful sight to behold, the spires of Notre Dame. And so it is across the street from the police headquarters of Paris also. And so you can't get a safer place than that, staying inside a hospital next to a church and police headquarters. Unfortunately, the hotel's website is now defunct, so I don't think they offer hotel rooms to the public anymore. Staying there was wonderful because it allowed me to envision myself in the center of Paris, and literally outside of Notre Dame is a marker where all distances in France are measured. My son, down here, was standing by the marker in front of Notre Dame. And just want to allow you to feast your eyes on this image for a little bit and say that, I am heartbroken that this monument was destroyed by fire. And I feel fortunate that I visited there when I did. There are some places that I wanted to see in Paris, but weren't part of any museum. And I was afraid I might not find them on my own. So I hired a tour guide to give me and my husband a walking tour of the city. I looked online for walking tours, but didn't find any established tours that satisfied my needs. However, I found one agency willing to design a tour with my input. And after several back and forth emails, ParisWalkabout.com created a walking tour for me and my husband. This was our guide, Gita Hilliard. The tour she created for me is now listed on their website as the first of 7 prepared tours they offer. I asked Gita for the site of a church dating back to the time of Charlemagne or before. I had hoped for something on the Ile de la Cité, but instead, she showed me a church on the left bank of the Seine River. Here you can see how close Saint-Julien-le-Pauvre is to Notre Dame Cathedral. It is also next door to Shakespeare and Company bookstore. So here's one view of the exterior of the church, and you can see how it has been renovated over the years. In fact, the current church has been there for only 7 centuries and was not the church standing at the time of Charlemagne over 1200 years ago. However, this church was mentioned in Gregory of Tours' book, The History of the Franks, which was written in the 6th century. So here's the interior of the church today. And since there wasn't any definitive mention about what it looked like back in the time of Charlemagne, I had artistic freedom to describe it as long as I was plausible. I gave modest descriptions of Romanesque arches that were common at the time. Gita also took us to see some remnants still standing of the medieval walls that once surrounded Paris. You could easily miss seeing it. There's the walls. And this is on the left bank on Rue Clovis, a few blocks east of the Pantheon. Here's a closer look at the wall to give you a sense of its size. And here is the historical marker for Philippe Auguste's wall. You will notice the year it started is past the year 802 when my story took place. So including the walls was an historical anachronism. Here's a maquette of what historians think the wall, of what Paris looked like in Roman times. And you can see how the left bank would be vulnerable to being destroyed by an invading army. Also notice the Roman arena is over to the side. It is outside of the medieval walls, and more on that later. So here's a maquette of what historians think the wall looked like surrounding medieval Paris. Remember, the poets were marvelous storytellers, but lousy historians, and they described the walls in the story. I considered removing the historically inaccurate walls and quickly realized how it would just add complications to an already complicated plot. And when it comes to balancing my dramatic needs with historical accuracy, I will come down on the side of drama every time, because I feel the worst sin you can commit as a writer is to bore your readers. My choice to retain historically inaccurate walls was mentioned in my author notes so that my readers would know it was a conscious decision on my part and not done out of ignorance. Besides, when all is said and done, my story was written to entertain the noble house of Geste in Ferrara, Italy. It was about a war that never took place and included magical realms and flying hippogriffs, so enjoy! After getting a sense of the magnitude of the walls, Yita brought us to what survives from the ancient Roman arena. Here's the historical marker that adorns its entrance on Rue Monge. And here's a model of what historians think the Roman arena may have looked like. Here's the entrance to the arena, the box seats for the nobles, the view of the arena from the cheap seats, and the cheap seats. In my second book, there are duels between warriors in the Muslim army. Ariosto had the duels being set on a field outside the Muslim camp. This was too boring for me. Instead, I moved it inside the old Roman arena. Having seen this historical site in person, I felt confident this change would be more exciting for my readers than duels being held in a field. After we left Paris, we stopped at Gualala. I don't remember how I first heard about this site, but it is one of the most memorable places we visited. It is in the Burgundy region and about an hour and a half southeast of Paris. The nearest big city is Auxerre, and it is not accessible by public transportation. You must drive to this remote setting where they are building a castle using 13th century technology. I could spend an hour talking about Gualala, so I'll make this succinct by saying they chose a site with everything they needed. It has a stone quarry, a forest for the wood needed, clay to make tile and grow their own hemp for rope. They also have blacksmiths to hand forge nails and repair the tools used by the stone cutters. Seeing this site helped me envision my characters in such a medieval setting. We then drove down to the Midi-Pyrenees region where we spent 2 weeks exploring the area. I found a gîte east of Montauban in the village of Montclair-de-Quessy to serve as our home base. The place was called Deramusque. This is an area of France that not many Americans visit, but I think is well worth visiting. The scenery is gorgeous. The prices are less expensive than Paris and Provence. Farmers markets are wonderful. And staying in a house allowed Scott to make me incredible dinners. So the city of Montauban was founded in 1144 and Charlemagne died in 814. So it is historically inaccurate to include the city, but it was used by the poets who wrote the Matters of France. They were fabulous dramatists, but not well versed on history. Trying to divorce Renaud from Montauban would be like trying to take Robin Hood out of Sherwood Forest. By accepting the idea that dramatic necessity required my using Montauban, it mentally freed me to include similar historical inaccuracies when I deemed it a plot necessity. That also meant my visit to Montauban was less demanding when it came to fact-finding. I mentioned previously, my climax for my first novel is in the village of Saint-Antonin-Noble-Val. And according to the town's history, the abbey was built in the 8th century by Pepin le Bref, Charlemagne's father. Here is the historical marker for the abbey. And this is all that remains of the Abbey of St. Antonin. Not these steps, just these few rocks here. It gave me the freedom to once again describe the Abbey in any way that worked for my narrative, as long as I was reasonable. Here is a small remnant of the Abbey and it is over the doorway of a house in the village. It is of Jonah and the whale and not a dude in a lion's mouth as I first thought. These are waves and not curls from a mane. So I needed a water fountain in the middle of the village, and I was inspired to describe it as Jonah and the whale in honor of this historical downspout. I took thousands of photos and could spend many hours discussing my adaptation process, but we'll stop here and give a short reading from my first novel. This scene is when Bradamante is given the call to adventure. We see her after she was tricked and abandoned, left for dead after falling into a deep cave. An eerie, Otherworldly sound began emanating from deep within the recesses of the cave as an ethereal light emerged from the wall of the cavern. Bradamant sat up and squinted as the light intensified and the outline of an open door appeared. Curious, she stood and cautiously walked through the opening into a chamber with high ceilings. The room was enshrined with alabaster columns. A white marble altar gleamed with light from a single oil lamp. Bradamant walked toward the altar, removed her helmet, and bowed as she knelt in fervent supplication before the Lord. A barefoot, elderly woman entered from a neighboring passageway. She wore a long white robe without a belt. Her gray tresses were disheveled, but she appeared jubilant. Bradamant, I have been expecting you. Who are you? And how do you know my name? I am Melissa, an enchantress, here to aid you in your quest. Fear not, dear child. The love you feel toward Rogero is because your souls are destined for one another. Bradamant stared at the woman. Melissa smiled. Do not worry about the differences of your faith keeping you apart. Those things will fall away. There are forces, however, which must be dealt with as they are attempting to alter your destiny. Should they prevail, the world will suffer by never having known the future generations who would have been born of your union with Rogero. Melissa took the bewildered Bradamant by the hand and led her into another chamber. In the center lay a tomb made of intricately carved stone bearing a glowing light from within. This had been the source of the sound she had heard. There was a low reverberation, intoning an undeniable reverence. Bradamant saw mysterious words in an unfamiliar language carved on the crypt. On its lid was the image of an old, wizened man. This is the tomb of Merlin, Melissa said. He was betrayed in this very cavern years ago by the Lady of the Lake. His soul is trapped here, and he will answer any question set before him. It was on your behalf that I came here to ask his advice. Merlin predicted you would come into his domain on this day. I have been waiting here patiently for your arrival. Bradamant was confused. She wondered if she had struck her head when she fell, and this was all a vivid dream. Then the casket ceased humming. She jumped as words came from within its depths. Blessed are you, noble and chaste maiden, daughter of Aemon from the house of Leon, intoned the deep voice of Merlin. The two purest lines of royal Trojan blood shall combine in your womb, and the pride of Italy shall be born. Future generations of emperors, dukes, and princes shall spring forth. Italy will be restored to her former glory, as in the golden days of yore, all due to the acts of valor from your progeny. You must not tarry, nor allow yourself to be deflected from a path that has been destined for you before your birth. You have the requisite courage and the strength to bring about liberty for Rogero the Valiant. The voice fell silent, and the humming sound resumed. Melissa walked over to a stone pedestal in a corner holding a pool of water. Touching a finger to its still surface, an image emerged. It was the face of a baby. Bradamant watched in wonder as she recognized Rogero's facial contours on the child, and who bore eyes like her own. Their features had commingled and created a beautiful child. Tears filled Bradamant's eyes as her arms ached to hold the infant. The image changed, and the face turned from a baby to a child, and then into a handsome young man. That is the face of your future son you will name Rogero, Melissa said. Such a son would make any parent proud. He is destined to help defeat another uprising by the Lombards, and for that he will be richly rewarded. Melissa swirled her fingers and new faces emerged. The enchantress told a story of future generations who would come from Bradamont's son and the noble deeds they would perform. Bradamont heard Melissa speaking, but she could not concentrate on anything further than the face of the child she was destined to bear. She had never considered becoming a mother. Now, she felt an overwhelming desire to nurture a child who was nothing more than an image in water. Bradamont took a deep breath and looked directly at Melissa. Tell me what I must do, and tell me why anyone would want to keep Rogero and me apart. So before I stop sharing my screen, I wanted to once again mention that my books are available for sale at Four-Eyed Frog Books. And since I'm local and this is the gift giving season, should anyone want a book specifically inscribed for a gift, that can be arranged. So if you want it personalized with to Jenny, may you have a Merry Christmas and may all of your quests be filled with honor and victory, Linda C. McCabe, I can do that. Just work with the staff at Four-Eyed Frog Books and let me know what you want written, and I will stop by and sign them for you, and then they will let you know when those books are available for you to do curbside pickup. I also wanted to invite you to visit my website at lindacmccabe.com or questofthewarriormaiden.com, and you can join my mailing list. I am in the process of writing the third volume in the trilogy, and will let you know when it is available. I also have a YouTube channel where I have more videos you might find of interest. And lastly, if anyone is a member of a book club, I would love to talk with your club, and I can show more photos from my research and answer any questions readers have about my story or the writing process. So, okay, and stop share and start my video. And now I can, you can all unmute and you can talk with me and ask questions. So go ahead. So you can unmute.
Let's mute.
Muted. Okay, Layla, did you have a question? Sorry.
Well, just unmuting as you asked us to.
Okay.
My husband knows a ton about Charlemagne, and a lot of the places you showed actually are right in our neighborhood, like Saint-Antonin we go to a lot. We have a house outside of Cahors in the valley, so we know that region really well. So that was exciting to just see all of the places you had researched and where you were basing your
Yeah, I also included Brunichel. I didn't put everything that I did, but I included Brunichel and the legend of Queen Brunhilde. That isn't in the story, but it was nearby, and that also dates back to the time of the Romans. And I thought that her story was so dramatic. I wanted to include that because it also shows that being in a noble family is not necessarily safe.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the stories we have of princesses marrying and the brave knights and stuff like that, it's not always as cut and dried and romantic like that. So I added that in there. So, and I also include Court-sur-Ciel.
Yes, which is an amazing place. Yeah.
Yeah. That one doesn't date back to the time frame, but since Montauban doesn't, I decided Court was right in the area and I needed another hilltop village, so I included Court.
That's great.
So, yeah.
Should I ask?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I missed the first 10 minutes because I was working on the electronics in our car.
Okay.
So what I'm wondering is, did you talk about Roland's death?
Yeah.
About the truth as opposed to the Chansons de Roland?
I did, and that it was the Basques and not the Saracen army.
Yeah.
And yes, so I included that. And what was kind of cool is that I found a photo or a drawing, and it had Roland with the horn, and he and the other paladins all had mustaches. And I didn't mention that, but at the time, that was the style of the Franks, is that they didn't have beards, they had mustaches, whereas the Romans were fully shaven. And so barbarians generally were bearded, and then the Franks had mustaches, which was different.
Well, but there is conflict there in that, not what you're saying, but in the whole story. For example, in one version of the Chansons de Roland, after the Muslim warriors kill Roland, they not only killed him, but they came and pulled on his beard, which was in the medieval period the biggest insult you could make. And again, there are at least 30 versions of the Chansons de Roland, but in the main one, it's that moment when the Muslim warriors pull his beard that the angels descend from the sky and destroy all of the Muslims.
So there's also a story that in Rocamadour that
The sword.
Roland's sword is stuck in the rock, and that would have been a Herculean.
Swear that it's there.
Right.
We have been there.
I'm sure you visited and saw the chapel of the Black
Yeah,
Virgin.
and this is interesting, is that in the Chansons de Roland, it talks about Durandal, which is the name of the sword then, that has artifacts, holy artifacts in it, in the hilt.
It supposedly in the handle had a bone of the then Saint-Denis, the patron saint of France. And so it was a magical sword, as you probably
Right.
well know.
And so in Orlando Innamorato and Orlando Furioso, Durandal becomes Durandana, and that sword was once owned by Hector of Troy. And since Hector of Troy was before the historical Jesus, that doesn't have the holy artifacts in its hilt. But it's important, and in Orlando Furioso and in Orlando Innamorato, the desire by multiple people to have that sword is a big plot point, and people are willing to die to get that sword.
Yes, yes. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. So does Susan or Francois or Walt have any questions?
Well, I'm kind of struck by the similarities between the English Arthurian stories, and just as you mentioned, the sword. That's also a major thing to protect the sword, and I'm sure there are many, many similarities.
There were more things, and it's like the scene I read for you had Merlin's tomb, and there were a couple other things where I think both Boiardo and Ariosto wanted to just horn in on popularity of Arthur. So they had Morgana in some things, and there were some things like, this is just not moving my plot, so I had to cut them. But I did include the Merlin's tomb. I included that, so that's about the only thing that's kind of left there. So, but yeah, there's quite a bit about swords and horses too. There was one of the images that I showed of Quatre Fils de Aimon, which is the four sons of Aemon, and that showed the magical horse Bayard, and there were four sons that were on the back of the horse because it could magically expand to allow them. And so that's in one part of the Chanson de Geste. But the expanding horse of Bayard is not part of Orlando Innamorato or Orlando Furioso. So I didn't include that. But Bayard is wanted and desired, and one warrior, Gradasso, actually leaves from the far east to go to the west because he wants Durindana and Bayard, and he's willing to risk everything to get a horse and a sword.
Were you a novelist before you started this trilogy?
I actually did a 5th-year fanfic for Harry Potter to try to see if I had the talent and stamina to do a novel-length story. And so I finished writing that before Jo Rowling published her 5th novel. So I had gotten mine out before she did. And it was interesting because there were some similarities and then, a lot of differences, but I was able to do that because there are so many people in my writers club. I'm a member of Redwood Writers, which is part of the California Writers Club. And there are many people that want to, when they retire, write the great American novel. And they may spend 20 years and never finish their novel because they don't have that. So I had actually done a big thing. Plus I did my master's thesis. So I was able to do a big written project and see it to its completion. So I've done many different kinds of things. So yes, I did do a novel project, and that actually was given an award from one website as the best novel length Harry Hermione pairing fanfic. So it's like I did get some acclaim on the web from the fandom. So
I have another thing to say if nobody else wants to at the moment. Yeah, you were talking about Marilyn, of course. Do you remember that in the second part of Don Quixote instructs his helpers to tie a rope around himself and drop him into the cave of Montesinos, which is supposed to be a mystical place in Spanish tradition. And when he gets there, he probably falls asleep and has this dream. Or he actually did meet Marilyn. And Marilyn, who had already been dead 500 years, had been resurrected. And he talks with Don Quixote. And Quixote asks him questions like this: in an enchanted world, is there still urination and defecation? And Marilyn tells him no, but fingernails do continue to grow. And he also meets his beloved, whom he's never seen in the world, Dulcinea, who asks him if she can borrow 4 duros from him and promises to give him a piece of her underwear as a proof that she will return the. So this is a totally ridiculous scene, but of course touching all of these great myths that every European knew at that time.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. So, I mean, that sounds like Bradamont's cave that she was put into.
Yeah.
And it was interesting when I was looking for caves and such in the area, I set it outside of Foix, where there is a subterranean river cave. Right. And so we went on a tour of that, and we were not allowed to take any pictures of. And I didn't know until we got there that my husband suffers from claustrophobia.
Yes.
And there's a point in the cave where we are on boats going through this, and the overhang was so low that we actually had to put our heads on our laps so we could go underneath. And so he was like having kittens. But anyway, I describe a river cave in the novel based on my research of that area. So
the Gouffre de Padirac is great too. That's where the source of the Dordogne is, and they take you in gondolas down that river. It's up in the Dordogne. I mean, it's actually, I think, in the Lot, the region of the Lot, but just near the Dordogne River, north, kind of not too far from Carignac.
So there was something else from the Lot. I didn't mention this, but this is cool, is that I have a hermit in my story, and the poets, there were like at least 3 hermits, and none of the hermits were named. And I include one who actually helps Bradamante after she's suffering from wounds, and he helps her. And I didn't want to have hermit on the page for like 11 pages and not name him. So I just thought that was, odd. And so I went online, and Catholic.org has hermit saints, and I like typed in hermit saints, and I think there were over 800, and I was like, holy crap. It's like, were they giving out like candy or something? And they had many bios. So at first I was just going to give a hermit saint name, and I was just looking, if there was been like 20, I would have picked the name the best, but there were bios. And so I started reading through them, and I found one that, according to legend, used to be a member of Charlemagne's army.
Oh, perfect.
Yes. And so I did more research, and so Saint Namphase had been something, and it's like I found on Cassie.net, Legend of Saint Namphase. And the first time I looked at it, it had, I did Google Translate into English because my French is not that good. And if I didn't garble things and make it too bad in my French pronunciations, I hope. Anyway, there was a really butchered translation, which was unintentionally hilarious, where it was something about Couvert de Religieuse, which translated to Convent of Chocolate Eclairs.
Right.
And it's like, I want to find that. And it was on the Lot River by Cajarc, which was south of Figeac.
Yeah.
And so I had scoured the Michelin map, and I found something where it said Monastère in ruins, or Abbey in ruins in Monastère. And so going there, and I got some wonderful pictures. And so it's like, so I included Saint Namphase. So I was trying to rescue an obscure saint from, saint from obscurity. So yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. And a couple of years ago, William McCarthy was saying he was going to go to France for something, and I interacted with him, and he had friends in Cajarc. And I was like, you have to go to the Gaffre de l'Intoué, which is just outside. So I was telling him all about it. I don't know if he ever went there, but no.
That's neat.
Yeah.
Beautiful area. Homesick.
So Francoise, can you unmute yourself?
That's the bottom left of your screen. There you go. Yeah.
Okay. Francoise, you said you had read the Chansons de geste years ago.
Yeah.
Did it bring back memories?
Pardon?
Did my presentation bring back memories for you?
Yeah, some memories, absolutely. But as I said, 65 years ago, in a French course, literature course, that was part of it. But I have to say, I have not much to add to what you've said. I mean, it's wonderful. I'm going to run out and buy your books.
Oh, good. Thank you. Yeah. Hey.
You did a lot of fun research.
I did.
Wonderful.
And I still do. So, Walt, do you want to say anything? If you do, you need to unmute yourself. Like at the bottom.
Oh no, he's on the iPhone.
Yeah, but there's got to be something, and he's trying. I know Walt and Nancy for years. And I know they moved away from Sea Ranch.
Can you hear me now? No?
Yes, hi. Can't see you, but I can hear you. So go ahead and talk, Walt. Oh, and now you just muted yourself again. Oops.
I'm on my iPhone. I should have done it on the computer, and the iPhone isn't ideal for doing this.
Yeah.
Shame on me. So I used a link from Facebook, and I was hoping to get a link directly into my Windows system, but
Yeah.
unfortunately I didn't. And shame on me for being late. No, we've traveled a lot, but not in that area of France, and I can confess that I have no skill in that area. We moved away from Sea Ranch, as you know, about 1.5 years ago, and we're in Carmel, Indiana right now. It was a very nice presentation. I didn't see the video, and I'm kicking myself because I didn't get on early enough and get the thing going. So
Okay. That's fine. So
Linda, you've been around Sea Ranch for a long time because you know Walt and you know Bill McCarthy, and
we bought our lot when my son was 6 months old, and he is now 22.
Okay.
And my husband has been he was on the board of directors when our son was small, and he's now chair of the utilities committee. So he's been around and doing a lot. And
Right.
back when we started, we're new owners. I got involved with the Mariners Drive brouhaha in front of the board of supervisors. So I got involved in Sea Ranch politics right away. So I got to know people. But
You said you were just building a house, so I thought you were probably very new here.
Well, we've rented houses for years,
Right.
and camped at Gualala Park for years, and now we are living here, and we'll be living here full time, and which is what we've wanted to be. Yeah, so it's been a process, and so but otherwise,
where's your house going to be?
it's on Broadreach by Leeward, near the golf course.
Okay.
On the north side. So yeah. And we are actually in a neighborhood, and I discovered that I will be like one of 4 authors in a couple houses. So it's like Author Row. Yay!
Well, I'm an author too, but it's something uninteresting to most people. I write on business conditions in the electronics industry, and I probably have over 2,000 publications, but they're all to the business community and the technical community, and nothing as lighthearted as or as carefully researched as you've done.
Well, I wouldn't say that yours isn't carefully researched. Technical writing is a skill, and it's like a lot of technical writers downplay the skill involved in that, because like the California Writers Club, which I was a member of, we are open to writers of all genres, including memoirists and mystery writers and technical writers. And I always like to say that. So it's difficult to write with skill and trying to make it entertaining to the people so they don't get totally bored, because my undergraduate is in laboratory medicine, and I will tell you that reading medical journal articles, I like it when I don't get totally bored to death by them. So yeah. So that's another thing, is that I'm analytical, and so that was part of my skill, is trying to recognize how many characters there are and what I can use, and try to have continuity between all these plot threads. And I cut a lot, but I still have an immense story between everything in order to tell it and allow the drama to play out. It's taken 3 novels to do it, and I'm still working on the 3rd, which will be, a lot of it will be in Arles.
Oh, great. Good.
And
Well,
yeah.
no, I was going to say Thank you very much. This has been incredibly interesting.
Oh, good. I'm glad you enjoyed it. So yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Linda. I wish there were more people.
Yeah, it
Say
was.
hi to Scott for us.
Will do. Yeah, there's been some things with the Four-Eyed Frog. They had meant to try to send it to their newsletter group, and the woman who's in charge of that just moved to Colorado, so she didn't get a chance to do that. And I came to them kind of late, and I wanted to try to get this done in advance of the Christmas gift giving season. So if people wanted to get any Christmas gifts and signed, and then they could do that. So
Okay.
yeah. So anyway, it was good seeing everyone, and I did record this, so there will be a link for other people. Like Marty Campbell said she wanted to see it, but she couldn't make it, so she's going to be able to watch it and hopefully enjoy the interactions with everyone. So okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Linda.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.